Hi, good day. Welcome to the dunamis.a.i.m broadcast. Thank you so much for being with us today. And we have been looking at the topic, making Jesus visible, right? Making Jesus visible. And today we want to look at the journey from pleasant to bitter and back again. The topic, the journey from pleasant to bitter and then back again. As I was preparing this conversation, it kind of reminded me of a period in my life where you felt like there was a little bit of, or there was a lot of nothingness that was going on. When you look at the story of Naomi, it was a time of, there was pleasure, then there was bitterness. There was this period where there was no food in the land, no husband in the home, no hope for the future. And on Monday we looked at how God finds a king in the backside of a desert. And on Tuesday, we looked at, how a son was revealed. And today, we are going to be looking at how God reveals himself when everything has been stripped away. And I'm not sure for you if you have been in that period, where you felt as if the stripping locust, it really came. And when it came with a vengeance. Everything that you had was stripped away. And isn't it funny that even in the midst of the stripping, even in the midst of everything just being ripped away from your the clutches of your hands being stripped away out of your grasp, that nonetheless God still requires that we remain faithful. He still requires that even in the midst of it, that you still demonstrate a good character. And when we look in the book of Ruth, we meet Naomi, and she left Bethlehem full and came back empty, right? She told her neighbors, don't call me pleasant anymore, because life has really dealt grievously with me. She believed that God dealt with her bitterly. How many of us do we go through our trials, we go through our seasons, and we really feel that God, you really deal with me rough. You really deal with me rough, right? And just like us, in those moments, you kind of feel that God really turned his back on you. But what was so important was that he didn't turn his back on her. He was really setting her up for greatness to unfold. And when you look at Ruth, the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verse 21, Naomi returned to Bethlehem empty-handed. We often hide our emptiness as Christians. I remember, I don't know if I told the story here, that I was going to a church once when I was way younger, and it was a prophetic church. And I remember at the time I had real terrible sinusitis, real terrible. And I think I'd gone to class the day, and I came home and I was just out of it. And I went to the pharmacy to buy some medication. And someone from that church saw me, and she was, you going to answer church? So how you sick? You're not pray, man, you're not live right. Something to that effect. And that was just a simple story, and there are many persons who have gone through worse situations where it it seems as if it is that you become vulnerable, if it is that something is going on with you, you have to hide it because it really demonstrates that you may have done something wrong. But when we look at the story of Naomi, she didn't hide her emptiness. She didn't hide the fact. And the truth, it was also visible, right? She is coming back. She left with her husband. She is coming back with emptiness. She's coming back with nothing other than her daughter-in-law. And so we often hide our emptiness, and because we want to look like good Christians, we want to look like, growing up the Joneses. But Jesus became or becomes visible when we are honest about our needs, when we are honest about our situations. He says, listen, I require truth in the inward parts. So it means, therefore, that he is requiring us to be truthful about what is going on with us on the inside. The emptiness, the brokenness, the pains, the scars that we try to hide. Naomi didn't pretend. She was upfront, she raw. In Jamaican terms, she was brawling with her truth, right? And the question is, are we trying to make Jesus visible by acting as if we're full? Are we trying to make Jesus visible by demonstrating to everybody else that, oh, this is what is good with me, this is what is going on with me, God have him on me? We have this song that we sing, God don't play about me. But that is true, but he also doesn't play about deception. So are we singing that God don't play about me, but we are deceiving ourselves by trying to make everybody think that God really don't play about us, when there is emptiness and there's brokenness and there is unforgiveness and there's bitterness, and we have not really been dealing truthfully on the inward parts and providing the platform for him to come to fill the void, to fill the emptiness, right? Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, and this can be found in Ruth 1 verse 22, right? Naomi thought God was against her, but he was perfectly timing her arrival for provision. Making Jesus visible requires that we trust his timing. We don't get to be like Sarah when she presented and brought Hagar into a situation because she didn't trust his timing. How many times have we stepped ahead of God to fulfill our own desires? I said, boy, God, I take long, right? But when you look at it, Ruth 1 verse 22, she came at the point of her brokenness, at the point of her journey, right? At the point where she decided that, listen, it's time for me to go home. She was coming in from famine into a time of, even though she had lost her husband, she had lost her sons, she was coming home with her daughter-in-law. She was coming into a point where God was providing. And so, in making him visible, even when the situations feel daunting, even when everything feels as if it is going against you, You know that, boy, the breakthrough is coming, but you just have to hold on just a little bit longer, right? Don't jump ahead of God. Hold on, He is coming. Trust His timing. She came in at the point where there was going to be provision. Can you trust God to work behind the scenes, even if you are going through a crisis period right now? It may seem as if everything is going out of whack, but trust that He's working it out. And with Him, we know that all things are possible. We know and understand with our God, all things are possible. Right? Naomi ends the book of Ruth holding her grandson. This is how God works. From the point of pain and grief, He will take you to your expected end. We have to know and understand that pain is not a detour, it is a pathway. My God, pain isn't a detour. Many times we see pain as something to shy away from, to back away from. But pain isn't a detour, it is a pathway. Naomi's story is one that reflects that even in the midst of pain and grief, if Ruth was still married to Naomi's son, she would have interrupted the journey of the Messiah. Jesus becomes visible when we realize our personal tragedies are still part of His great redemptive plan. And that is how we end today's broadcast. Right? Jesus is visible when we understand and recognize that even in the midst of our tragedies, there is still redemption, because with Him we know that all things are possible. Like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you on Friday for prevailing prayer. Be blessed, my brothers. Be blessed, my sisters. See you next time.